My name is Carlota Dochao Naveira. I'm a director at Superblue. Superblue is an immersive art gallery and center based in Miami.
And tell me about your foray from digital art into the NFT world.
So at Superblue, we are dedicated to supporting artists creating non-object based art, which can range from site-specific large-scale installations all the way to architectural scale immersive environments. And so we have a physical space, but we also have a lot of digital activations. And so when we started getting used to the idea of NFTs, it just presented a world of possibility of how to monetize on our existing community, how to create or build on our community. And yeah, so there's a lot that we can do with NFTs.
But then on a personal level, you also created platforms like Blockchain What, and you very much explore the critical conversations that are taking place within the NFT world and how it corresponds with the broader art industry. So what motivated the creation of that?
It's a bit of a cliche, but it started during lockdown. I was stuck at home, started investing into crypto, and as I invested into crypto, I thought, well, I should probably know what technology is all about and kind of just understand it a little better. And so based on that, I started researching, and I realized that there was just so much potential for the art world and for Superblue more specifically, which is what I know and what I'm used to. And so this investigation led me to kind of start, being that person at a dinner table just going on and on about NFTs, blockchain technology, and all of that. And eventually I decided to channel that energy into creating content first off on Instagram and now more recently through speaking opportunities, writing as a guest columnist in online papers. And of course, what's interesting is that I had never used Twitter before because I'm very much from the traditional art world, and now I'm starting to get used to the idea of Twitter. But I really started that Instagram account because I was catering to my circle, my community, and it worked out really well because it helped me just cement ideas that I had, and really kind of when you explain something to someone, you understand it yourself so much better. And so that was kind of the beginning, and it evolved into creating a strategy for Superblue, and now heading the Web3 strategy for Superblue.
So then you have the interesting position of having a personal fascination with this technology and what it means for the art space, because you're also just generally fascinated with art, but also having a prominent role within an established art institution like Superblue, and having to navigate how this new emerging world maps onto a more traditional structure. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing right now? What are the biggest frustrations you have with trying to incorporate NFTs into that space?
Yeah, the challenges that we have today is the fact that, there's many challenges. One of them at the beginning was an educational challenge, which was about, helping people who don't understand what NFTs are, or had never heard about them, understand what they are and what the potential is. That was a challenge that lasted a year, and now finally, I'm speaking about Superblue, but also beyond Superblue, more and more traditional art world actors are warming up to the idea of NFTs, not only as an art form, but also as a form of innovation, let's say, in the art world, which, is a very difficult industry to innovate. It's quite stagnant at times, and that's a frustration that I have personally. So I really present that. And then the second challenge is that I feel that realistically today, there's a lot of big ideas within Web3, which are very exciting, but the technology isn't there yet. And therefore, just something as simple as user experience, it's just not there. It's very complicated to download a wallet. The idea of cryptocurrency is very complicated, and it creates a huge barrier to entry there. And I know that that's going to change, it's going to improve over time, but at the moment it's not there. And so when you are working within these larger structures that are already very established, that have communities, it's quite normal and natural that they're going to be a bit more skeptical and a bit more risk averse at the beginning. And as soon as the education comes in, the technology ameliorates, gets better, that's when we're going to start seeing a much greater adoption.
So does that mean you think that perhaps we're caught up in too much of the enthusiasm of it all before we've actually answered the fundamental questions of how exactly we want to see this grow, or how the parameters that we want to set in order for this to grow in a way that we can kind of understand, to a degree, control, and to basically properly reap the benefits of?
Exactly. I think that there are clear benefits. One of them, an obvious one, is just a more equitable distribution of wealth and attention. That is, something that needs innovation within the art world. And we're also so stuck in the technology today. I always say when we use a website or when we start a website, we use the internet. We never think about the functionality behind creating a website, but we just go for it, and we're not there yet with Web3. So I'm really hoping that sooner rather than later we're gonna even stop using terminologies like NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I mean, we spent the part of last year just even trying to understand what a non-fungible token meant, just because the word was so complicated. And so there's a lot of barriers there that prevent us from just kind of forgetting, unnecessary details and just getting to what you're saying, the vision of it, and the real tools to achieve that vision.
So in a way that we're just basically getting caught up in the semantics, and we're allowing semantics to prevent us from actually exploring this a bit more readily. And as you said, the confusion around these terms has led to the risk aversion for many institutions and has created an almost deeper divide between this emerging blockchain art-based community, because they all have the common understanding of what they're building and how they're celebrating each other's work, versus whether they actually need to break into the traditional art realm overall. And because it's just proving to be an uphill battle. So if you have a healthy ecosystem, why should there still be efforts for them to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think in terms of bridging the gap, that's a very interesting one, and how you said it makes a lot of sense. Is, on one end we have this growing grassroots movement, as you were saying earlier, of a NFT art space, let's say, who are a whole new set of artists, a whole new set of collectors with a whole new set of ideas, and that's very exciting. But sometimes there's that risk about, and it goes both ways. On one end, there's the risk that this new art community is reinventing the wheel and not actually learning from all the experience, let's say, that the quote unquote traditional art world has experienced over centuries, because that art world has evolved and over a very long period of time. So there's a learning gap there where, in terms of presentation, how artworks are showcased, how critics, the lack of critics, all these different things. It's something that is hindering, I would say, the NFT art space. But on the other end, we have the more traditional art world that is also not learning from this new art space in terms of the technology and the potential for this technology. And so I personally see myself as someone that, or my dream, or now my ambition is to be that kind of, or form part of that bridge, which, we're, all of us here are part of that today, but it's about that bridge needs to grow and converge, and synergy needs to be created from both communities.
So then what's one key lesson you think blockchain-based art communities can learn from the traditional artwork framework, and then what's one lesson that the traditional art framework can really embrace from what they're seeing in these tech-focused communities?
Yes. So to answer your first question, what the, let's say, NFT art space can learn from the traditional art world, I think a main one is this idea that this discourse around the death of the middleman is, completely unnecessary, and actually is really detrimental to the artist. And I think that there's a reason, again, as I was saying, the art world has evolved over centuries, and there's always been patrons, there's always been collectors, there's always been artists, there's always been critics, there's always been museums, institutions. That whole ecosystem is in place for a reason. And lesson number one is that, and I always say, artists are there to be creative, and they shouldn't be doing all the admin of selling, understanding, networking, all of that. They can, but it shouldn't be. They shouldn't be a one-man show. And there's a reason why there's structures in place to support them, so that they can continue innovating and being creative. So that's one main lesson from one to the other. A lesson that I think the more traditional art world could learn from the NFT art space is this idea of how that distribution of wealth that I was alluding to earlier, this idea of royalties, which I learned recently isn't actually enforced by the tech, but it's actually enforced by the community. So the community decided from day one that artists should be seeing a resale royalty from the art that they create in perpetuity. And that's something that has in some places in the traditional art world it exists. But it's not the norm. And so that's one area where I think, if you start thinking about how you can distribute wealth in a more equitable manner and help artists be successful, that's a lesson that we really have to learn from the NFT art space.
There's a lot to unpack there. I love the idea of the death of the middleman does not necessarily have to exist in the context of art in the way that it's just been assumed is absolutely critical to all of blockchain-based transactions. I think that's a critical field, and it's probably something we're going to have to interview about another time. And then in terms of the royalty structure and how that's going to impact artists and the top-down enforcement of those rules when it comes to the traditional art world. Again, I think that's a whole other field. But I want to go into more of your understanding of the Tezos-based art community and how much you've interacted there and sort of what's really stood out to you in seeing how that ecosystem is evolving.
I think the main thing that Tezos, from my perspective, Tezos is famous for is it's not highbrow. It's communities of people, pockets of communities of people worldwide that are getting together, that are so passionate about creating art, about innovation, about really building something that is has a collective spirit. And that's something that I felt that every time I speak to someone who's involved in the Tezos ecosystem, they always go back to this idea of, we're starting from the bottom up. We're building something that, we don't need the validation of these, traditional structures to tell us what is good, what is bad art. We ourselves are here for each other, and we're gonna make this happen. And what's interesting is that these pockets exist all over the world, and the beauty of the technology is that it's all digital. So all of a sudden there's no borders, and everything, people are communicating worldwide, creating, learning from one another, and I think that's very exciting.
And how do you think art institutions or the members of art institutions should begin participating in those conversations and actually joining those communities so that they're less of an other and more something like, or a movement that they're actually a part of?
Digital art has been around for decades, right? But it tends to be overlooked, especially by the contemporary art market, but the contemporary art market trickles down into institutions and collectors and all these different, again, art world actors. And I think that because of the growth of, because of the wealth, it sounds a bit vulgar to say it this way, but the pool of wealth that exists in this space because of these crypto rich and all these different things has made the traditional art world they just can't ignore this space anymore. They have to do something about it. They have to be involved, and it takes time. These things, it's not it's not overnight that the traditional art world is going to start embracing these new, as I said, grassroots movements, expanding the definition of art, expanding the definition of whose art is valuable versus whose art isn't worthy. And but we're really in a step in the right direction. And I think Tezos is one of the main actors in paving that way for the traditional art world to learn more and expand that definition. Yeah.
So in one way, like the vulgarity of the wealth that's kind of amassing within the blockchain space is both a draw and a deterrent for traditional art players, because I guess it's the notion that it is an outpouring of wealth over things that may not necessarily be aesthetically beautiful or to institutions not be considered as art, but at the same time there's an economic opportunity there that can't be missed.
Exactly.
So what kind of impact can an institution have in terms of setting up some kind of guidelines or collaborating to set up a joint agreement or social contract, as it were, of how art should be appraised, valued, curated? How do those practices and those disciplines find a middle ground?
I don't think that I think it's something that is very difficult to quantify and to leave in writing. It's something that happens over time. It's very gradual, but I think, the art world exists in a very specific way, but it's very intangible. It's very difficult to understand why an artwork or an artist is praised versus not. I mean, there's a huge subjective element there, but there's also all these different power plays in place. And so the wealth from the blockchain community, et cetera, has, in terms of power plays, has, imposed itself somehow there. And it's really interesting because in a way you think, okay, well, does does this new art form really need the validation from these traditional players? Maybe not, you know? If the NFT art space has its own set of collectors, its own set of critics, its own set of artists that are being validated and praised and liked and loved by their communities, maybe it's just a new form of art, a new art movement really that doesn't really necessarily rely on what the more traditional art world has or how it has operated over time.
We will end with the last question, which we give absolutely everybody. If you could describe blockchain in one word or a very short phrase,
oh wow,
what would it be?
Blockchain, like the technology.
Yeah, the principles, the philosophies, the technology, however you want to interpret it.
If I had to describe blockchain in one word, I would describe it as progress, because it is a technology that has the potential to really improve or take us take a step in the right direction in terms of how the art world that is, as I was saying earlier, at times very stagnant and backward thinking, just in the right direction, because it is allowing artists to have way more power in how their art is, where are their artists shown, how it is shown, how they produce, and it's also allowing them the funds, especially for digital art, more financing to be able to do research and development and innovate. So I think it's going to be the next few years, and thanks to the advent of NFT technology and the growth of it, it's going to be a really exciting time for artistic creation. I'm really excited about that.
Carlota, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and actually share your thoughts, because I think being able to bridge a conversation between this new and emerging world and the old guard, as it were, is one that's well overdue. And I think, having young and diverse voices like yours in this space to sort of navigate it is a very, very powerful thing. So thank you.
I could say the same about you. So thank you, Marissa. Great to be here.